The Congo Basin contains the second largest rainforest on Earth, over 500 million acres of unbroken jungle stretching across 6 countries, rivers that have never been mapped, swamps that no outsider has ever entered. The indigenous people who have lived along these rivers for thousands of years describe a creature the size of an elephant with a long neck and a powerful tail that dwells in the deepest swamps. Western scientists who hear that description go quiet. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because the evidence is real. Before the creature, before the witnesses, before the expeditions and the tracks and the audio recordings, there is the Congo itself. And the Congo is the foundation on which everything that follows rests, because understanding what the Congo Basin is as a physical environment is the necessary precondition for understanding why the question it has been generating for over a century has not been straightforwardly answered by any of the investigation methods applied to it. The Congo Basin is not the Amazon. The Amazon has been surveyed, cataloged, mapped in satellite resolution, and increasingly developed to the point where the possibility of a large, undocumented species existing within its boundaries has been progressively reduced by the human infrastructure that now penetrates it. The Congo is different, wilder, more remote, more resistant to exploration than any comparable ecosystem on the planet. 500 million acres of unbroken jungle, rivers that shift seasonally, carving new channels through terrain that floods for months at a time and then recedes, leaving behind environments that no fixed map can accurately represent. Swamps whose vegetation grows so thick that travel through them is not difficult, but in many areas genuinely impossible without the specific knowledge of passable routes that only people who have lived within them for generations possess. Satellite imagery cannot penetrate the canopy to reveal what moves beneath it. The forest floor, where the evidence of large animal presence concentrates in tracks, trails, and feeding signs, is functionally invisible to any survey method that does not involve direct human presence on the ground. The Likouala swamp region in the Republic of Congo, where the majority of the most significant reports have originated, covers approximately 145,000 square kilometers. To put that in terms that communicate the scale of what systematic survey would require, it is larger than England and Wales combined. Researchers who have attempted to survey the Likouala consistently report that vast sections remain completely unexplored, not inadequately surveyed, completely unexplored. Areas where no researcher has ever set foot and where the logistical demands of access make sustained presence extremely difficult. Disease, insects, seasonal flooding, the specific combination of factors that makes the Congo Basin the most challenging large-scale terrestrial environment for sustained field research on the planet. The okapi, a large mammal related to the giraffe that is now a symbol of the Congo's biodiversity, was completely unknown to Western science until 1901. It had existed in the Congo forest for millions of years. Indigenous people knew it. It had been described in the oral traditions of communities whose territory it shared. Western science dismissed those descriptions until a specimen was finally collected, and the scientific world was forced to acknowledge that a large mammal had been living in the second largest rainforest on Earth for millions of years without appearing in any scientific record. The Congo peacock, a bird, something that should be easier to document than a large aquatic animal, was not known to Western science until 1936. New species of primates, rodents, reptiles, and amphibians continue to be discovered in the Congo Basin every year. The region has not been surveyed thoroughly enough for any responsible scientist to claim complete knowledge of its fauna. That is the physical foundation on which the Mokele Mbembe question rests. This is a place that hides things, large things, things that have existed for a very long time without appearing in any scientific record, not because they do not exist, but because the environment that contains them makes documentation extraordinarily difficult. Whatever follows in this video should be understood against that foundation. The indigenous communities of the Congo Basin, the Pygmy and Bantu peoples whose ancestral territories encompass the river systems and swamp zones where the most significant accounts originate, are not people whose knowledge of their environment deserves to be treated as a secondary source requiring Western scientific validation before it is taken seriously. They have lived in this environment for thousands of years. Their survival has depended on understanding its ecosystem with a precision that academic researchers who visit for months at a time cannot match. They know its animals. They can identify species from sounds, from tracks, from distant silhouettes across water, from behavioral signs whose reading requires the kind of accumulated observational knowledge that only sustained multi-generational presence in a specific environment produces. The creature they call Mokele Mbembe, a name that translates roughly as one who stops the flow of rivers, is not a vague mythological figure in their tradition. It is a specific animal whose physical description, behavioral characteristics, territorial range, and ecological relationships have been documented with a specificity that distinguishes genuine observational knowledge from shared cultural mythology. They describe its size, approximately that of a large elephant, possibly larger. Its body plan: a long, flexible neck, a small head relative to the body, 4 powerful legs, a long and muscular tail. Its skin: smooth, without scales, brownish-gray in color. Its habits: primarily aquatic, spending most of its time submerged or semi-submerged, emerging to feed on vegetation along riverbanks and in shallow lakes. Its diet: herbivorous, with a preference for specific plants, including a type of wild climbing plant called malombo that grows along riverbanks. Its behavior: territorial, dangerous when disturbed, capable of capsizing canoes and killing hippopotamuses. Its vocalizations: low resonant calls that carry through the swamp. Its seasonal patterns: specific times of year when activity and sighting frequency increase. Its territory: specific stretches of river and specific lakes that local communities avoid because Mokele Mbembe is known to inhabit them. This level of behavioral and ecological detail is not characteristic of mythological creatures. Mythological entities are described in symbolic and supernatural terms. Real animals are described with observed behaviors whose specificity reflects genuine interaction. The Mokele Mbembe accounts have the character of real observation transmitted across generations, not legend. When Roy McCall, a University of Chicago biologist, showed Indigenous witnesses illustrations of various known animals during his 1980 and 1981 expeditions, they identified elephants, hippos, and crocodiles without difficulty from the illustrations provided. When shown illustrations of sauropod dinosaurs, animals that no person living today has ever seen in life, they consistently identified these as matching the creature they called Mokele Mbembe. The witnesses were not confused. They were not misidentifying animals they knew perfectly well. They were distinguishing between what they knew and what they were being shown, and confirming that what they were being shown matched what they had seen. The indigenous knowledge base for Mokele Mbembe exists independently of Western documentation, but the Western account record that has been accumulating since the early 20th century adds a dimension to the evidence whose significance is different from the indigenous tradition. Not more credible, but differently credible, because the Western accounts come from people whose professional and personal backgrounds provide specific frameworks for assessing what they encountered. The first significant Western documentation dates to 1909, when big game hunter Carl Hagenbeck published accounts he had collected from native sources in the Congo region describing a creature that was half elephant, half dragon, and feared throughout the swamp country. Hagenbeck was sufficiently intrigued to organize an expedition that failed to locate the animal. In 1913, a German expedition led by Captain Ludwig Freiherr von Stein zu Lausnitz collected detailed reports from multiple tribal groups along the Likouala and Sangha rivers, whose descriptions were consistent across communities that had no contact with each other, a consistency that Stein noted in his official report as significant evidence of genuine observation rather than shared narrative. In 1932, Ivan Sanderson, a trained biologist and naturalist with credentials that gave his accounts professional weight, was traveling by boat on the Mainyu River in Cameroon when something large surfaced near his boat. Sanderson described a head nearly the size of a hippopotamus head, but shaped completely differently, attached to a long neck that rose from the water, and observed the boat before submerging. His local guides were terrified and identified the creature immediately. Sanderson was not prone to exaggeration. He reported what he saw without claiming certainty about its identity, but he was convinced he had seen something unknown to science. The missionary accounts constitute a distinct evidentiary category whose specific character deserves acknowledgement. Christian missionaries have operated in the Congo Basin for over a century. They live among indigenous communities for years at a time. They learn local languages. They build relationships whose depth gives them access to knowledge that brief research visits cannot produce. They have no professional stake in cryptozoological claims. Their professional and personal reputations depend on truthfulness rather than on the validation of extraordinary claims. Yet missionaries have consistently reported Mokele Mbembe accounts. In 1966, Reverend Eugene Thomas documented detailed witness accounts from near Lake Tele. In the 1970s, missionaries reported an extraordinary account from villagers who claimed to have killed a Mokele Mbembe that had been disrupting their fishing, a creature they attacked with spears after constructing a barrier of stakes to keep it from their fishing waters, and whose meat they ate with consequences whose specific character the account describes. The remains were never recovered. The village has never been conclusively identified, but the account was reported by missionaries with no incentive for fabrication and every professional reason for honesty. The transition from anecdotal accounts efforts to organized scientific investigation began in earnest in the 1980s with Roy McCall's expeditions to the Likouala region. McCall was a University of Chicago biologist with mainstream research credentials, a researcher whose professional standing in the scientific community gave his decision to investigate Mokele Mbembe the weight of institutional credibility rather than the fringe character that cryptozoological investigation typically carries. He went to the Congo because the accumulation of evidence had convinced him that something warranted serious scientific attention. His 1980 and 1981 expeditions did not produce photographic documentation of Mokele Mbembe. What they produced was a body of witness testimony whose consistency and whose specific character McCall assessed as scientifically significant. Multiple witnesses across different communities and different geographic areas independently described an animal whose physical characteristics and behavioral patterns were consistent with each other and inconsistent with any known species in the region. They identified known animals correctly from illustrations and identified sauropod illustrations as matching what they had seen. McCall's conclusion was that an unknown large animal almost certainly existed in the Lake Likouala swamps. He could not prove it was a surviving dinosaur. He could not account for the evidence as the misidentification of known species. The Japanese expeditions that followed in 1988 and 1992 contributed two categories of evidence that have remained significant despite the controversy they generated. The 1988 Nippon television expedition produced approximately 15 seconds of footage from Lake Tele, showing something moving in the water, a disturbance with apparent bulk whose identification remains disputed. Skeptics have proposed elephant as an explanation. The indigenous guides who were present and who knew elephants intimately rejected that identification. The footage proves nothing definitively, but documents a real disturbance in the lake whose source remains unestablished. The 1992 expedition led by Takahide Kazama produced physical evidence in the form of large three-toed prints in soft mud along a riverbank. 3 toes, not the 4-toed prints of a hippopotamus, not the rounded prints of an elephant, not the drag-accompanied prints of a crocodile. 3-toed prints whose dimensional profile indicated significant mass and whose specific characteristics were photographed and cast. The casts have been examined by researchers since their collection. No definitive identification has been produced. No known animal in the region leaves 3-toed prints of those dimensions. The tracks are consistent with what a large 3-toed quadruped would leave. The simplest available explanation for the consistent presence of 3-toed prints across multiple decades and multiple expeditions in the Likouala region is that something with 3 toes and significant mass is walking in those swamps. Modern expeditions to the Congo Basin have deployed technological capabilities that the earlier investigators did not possess, and the evidence those capabilities have produced constitutes the most scientifically defensible body of Mokele Mbembe evidence yet accumulated. Audio recording equipment, hydrophones deployed in waterways, directional microphones in forest clearings, autonomous recording devices left running continuously for days at a time, has been capturing the acoustic environment of the Likouala region with a comprehensiveness and a technical quality that earlier expeditions could not achieve. The recordings have produced sounds that researchers working with the acoustic evidence cannot identify against the reference library of known Congo species. Low-frequency vocalizations that acoustic analysis places in a frequency range inconsistent with the known large mammals of the region. Disturbances in waterways whose acoustic signature suggests large animals moving through the water in areas where the known aquatic fauna does not produce comparable signatures. A recording from 2018 captured a series of low-resonant calls, whose duration and whose internal structure acoustic analysis characterized as consistent with vocalization from a very large animal. Sounds that do not match the acoustic profiles of elephants, hippopotamuses, or any other documented species in the Congo region. When indigenous guides familiar with the region's acoustic environment listened to the recordings, they identified some of the unidentified sounds as Mokele Mbembe vocalizations. The acoustic evidence does not prove the existence of a living sauropod. What it proves is that something is producing sounds in the Congo Basin that the available reference material for known species cannot account for. Something large enough that the low frequency calls it produces travel through dense jungle. Something that calls from swamps where its presence would not be predicted by any biological model currently accepted by mainstream science. The environmental DNA technique that produced the most rigorous results in the Loch Ness investigation is potentially the most powerful tool available for the next phase of Mokele Mbembe research. Animals leave genetic material in the water they inhabit, shed cells, waste products, microscopic genetic traces that can be collected and analyzed without ever seeing the animal directly. If Mokele Mbembe exists as a biological entity inhabiting the Congo swamps at population sizes sufficient to sustain breeding, it will be leaving its genetic signature in the water. A systematic environmental DNA survey of the Likouala waterways conducted with the methodological rigor that modern eDNA analysis permits could potentially provide the first genetic evidence of an unknown large species in the Congo Basin, evidence whose quality would be immune to the photographic ambiguity that has limited every prior evidence category. The immediate objection that the Mokele Mbembe hypothesis generates from the mainstream scientific perspective is a biological one. The impossibility of a sauropod dinosaur surviving for 65 million years after the extinction event that eliminated the rest of its lineage. The objection is reasonable. It is also less definitive than its confident deployment in mainstream dismissals of the hypothesis suggests. The history of biology contains examples of survival that the prior understanding of extinction events did not predict. Crocodiles have survived essentially unchanged for over 200 million years. The coelacanth, a prehistoric fish whose entire lineage was believed to have gone extinct 65 million years ago alongside the dinosaurs, was discovered alive in 1938, when a living specimen was caught off the coast of South Africa. The creature that Western paleontology had considered extinct for 65 million years had been known to the Comoran people who lived alongside it. Horseshoe crabs have existed for 450 million years with minimal evolutionary change. Nautiluses have survived virtually unchanged for 500 million years. The assumption that dinosaurs could not have survived is based on the belief that the extinction event 65 million years ago was total and absolute. Extinction events are never total. Some lineages survive. Some populations persist in refugia where specific conditions allowed continued existence despite the broader catastrophe. The Congo Basin has been continuously forested for millions of years. Its climate has remained relatively stable across the geological timescale that would encompass a surviving sauropod lineage. The swamp environments of the Likouala region provide the specific combination of food resources, aquatic concealment capability, and low predator pressure that a large herbivorous animal with aquatic habits could theoretically exploit. The physical description that indigenous witnesses consistently provide for Mokele Mbembe is anatomically plausible for a surviving sauropod, a long neck adapted for reaching elevated vegetation or submerged aquatic plants, aquatic habits that provide thermoregulation and predator avoidance. A herbivorous diet consistent with the abundant riverbank and swamp vegetation of the Likouala, a large body size consistent with the sauropod body plan. The description is not random. It is not a fantasy animal assembled from incompatible biological features. It is an animal whose described anatomy is internally consistent and whose described ecology is consistent with the available habitat. That does not prove Mokele Mbembe exists. It establishes that the animal described could exist within the constraints of known biology in the specific environment where the witnesses report encountering it. The argument that a large, undiscovered species cannot exist in the Congo Basin because the region has been sufficiently surveyed to preclude it reflects a specific and demonstrably false assumption about what the available survey coverage actually establishes about the region's fauna. The Congo Basin is not a well-surveyed environment. It is an immense wilderness in which the discovery of new species, including large species, has continued consistently throughout the period of modern biological documentation. The Okapi discovery in 1901 was not a marginal contribution to the known fauna of the region. It was a large, distinctive mammal, a relative of the giraffe, whose existence in the Congo forest had been completely unknown to Western science despite the region having been the subject of colonial and missionary activity for decades. The Congo peacock was not documented until 1936. The bonobo, one of humanity's closest relatives, was not recognized as a species distinct from the chimpanzee until 1929. The list of large species discovered in the Congo Basin in the 20th century alone is long enough that the claim of comprehensive survey coverage is not defensible. New primate species continue to be identified in the region. New large reptile species have been documented within living memory. The specific characteristics of the swamp environments where Mokele Mbembe reports are concentrated, the Likouala swamps, Lake Tele, the Sanga River system, make them the least surveyed and the most difficult to survey of any area within the Congo Basin. These are not forest environments accessible to the kind of sustained pedestrian survey that biological field research typically employs. They are waterlogged, seasonally flooded, vegetation-choked aquatic environments whose access requires specialized equipment, local knowledge, and a physical tolerance for conditions that few researchers can sustain for extended periods. The comparison to ocean environments is instructive. Giant squid were considered mythological until dead specimens were recovered in the 19th century. Living giant squid were not not filmed until 2004, 150 years after the species' biological reality was established from specimens. The megamouth shark, a large filter-feeding species reaching 5 to 6 meters in length, was completely unknown to science until a living specimen was accidentally caught in 1976. The Omora's whale, a large baleen whale, was described from only skeletal material until living individuals were photographed for the first time in 2015. Large animals can remain undocumented in environments that humans cannot easily access. The Congo swamps are exactly that kind of environment. The most recent expeditions into the Likouala region have produced the strongest cumulative evidence body the investigation has ever assembled. Dozens of independent witness accounts from communities across different geographic areas describing the same animal with the same physical characteristics and the same behavioral patterns. A fisherman who watched a long-necked creature feeding on riverbank vegetation for several minutes before it submerged. A hunter who found 3-toed tracks leading from forest to swamp that matched nothing in his knowledge of the region's fauna. An elder who claims repeated encounters over a lifetime in the same stretch of river. Camera traps have documented known species but not Mokele Mbembe, a result that reflects inadequate coverage of an immense swamp system rather than the animal's absence. The acoustic recordings from 2018 remain unidentified against every known species reference available. The environmental DNA technique that produced significant results at Loch Ness has not yet been systematically applied to the Likouala waterways. When it is, it will either find something or establish the most definitive negative result the investigation has ever produced. The window is narrowing. Habitat destruction is accelerating. The answer may arrive before the opportunity to find it closes. Something is in the Congo. The evidence is real. The swamp is large enough to hide the answer. The search is not finished.